Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Policy Exchange. My name is Jonathan Simons. I'm Head of Education here at Policy Exchange, and it's an absolute pleasure and a privilege to introduce the Right Honourable Nicky Morgan MP, Secretary of State for Education, to talk about her speech on educational excellence, turning vision into reality. It's a wonderful delight to see so many of you here. I think it's a real mark of the interest that this speech has generated that we opened applications for tickets last Tuesday and we were full 24 hours later. We were then overfull and then overfull again, which is why there's so many of you standing. So apologies for that, but it's really, as I say, a mark of the interest that I think this speech has generated, that there's so many people here who want to hear what the Secretary of State has to say. Secretary of State will speak for about 20 minutes and then there'll be plenty of opportunities for questions afterwards. So without any further ado, I'd welcome to introduce the Secretary of State.
Well, thank you, Jonathan, and thank you to Policy Exchange for hosting me here this morning. I have to say, this is almost more crowded than a Jeremy Corbyn rally, so I'm flattered. And you know you've arrived when you have your own Twitter hashtag, so thank you very much to Policy Exchange for that. It really is great to see so many of you here today, so many people who are passionately interested in our education system. But it's always nice that Twitter brings you back down to earth, and there is always a belief that Secretaries of State are more powerful than they actually are, including, I must mention the Twitter this morning from AJ's Ramblings, who said, "Too many husks in my porridge this morning. I think it's Nicky Morgan trying to shut up an angry teacher by ruining my breakfast." So AJ, I wasn't responsible for your porridge, I can assure you. Now, many of you have been key players in the transformation of English education in the past 5 years. You've been the ideas factories, the sounding boards, the testing grounds, and of course the critical friends that have led and shaped the phenomenal improvements in English education over the last 5 years and more. That transformation hasn't been easy. We've challenged the status quo, debunked accepted truths, and questioned vested interests. It takes determination, it isn't universally popular, and there are always setbacks. And it couldn't have been done without the hard work and dedication of heads, teachers and schools up and down the country, and I want to thank them for that. But for all of the challenge, the mission has been worth it. Worth it for the millions of children who are now in schools rated good or outstanding. Children now getting off to a better start in life. Worth it for the 120,000 more 6-year-olds on track to become confident readers as a result of our focus on phonics. 120,000 more young people who might have struggled now on the path to success. And it's been worth it for the 29,000 extra 11-year-olds who are entering secondary school able to read, write and add up properly, able to access the opportunities that the next stage of education brings, rather than being frustrated at the very first hurdle. I quote these statistics at every opportunity I get, because they matter. They matter to the young people whose life chances have been transformed, and they matter to our whole country. Because good schools and a well-educated population make our country stronger, fairer, wealthier, and more secure. Now, there are many things on which you won't be surprised to hear I don't agree with Tony Blair, not least what constitutes an actual apology. But I cannot disagree with his priorities for government: education, education, education. There can be no better investment than in our education system. I love my job, and I suspect teachers across the country love their jobs too, because they are positive, creative, ambitious, and focused on the future. Many of my colleagues in government spend their time trying to work out how to reduce the number of people who have access to their services. And that's right, after all, we all want fewer people needing to call the police, falling ill, or relying on welfare. But education is different. My job is to maximise participation, not to reduce it. I want to make our schools and colleges places where young people achieve more. And I want to continue to increase the number who stay on in education or an apprenticeship to 18 and beyond. So although we all know that the spending review will be tight, this government is committed to protecting school funding and creating 3 million more apprentices, because we want to give the best to every young person. That's why at the Conservative Party conference this year, I committed to going further than simply education, 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 with the next 3 E's: educational excellence everywhere. I want every child to benefit from the sort of education that young people get at schools like King Solomon Academy in London, Denby High School in Luton, and Fernwood School in Nottingham. Schools which are the real engines of social justice. That's the sort of school that every child should be attending. For all the successes of our reforms over the past 5 years, one of the consequences of the emergence of these beacons of excellence has been to highlight how far some schools and some parts of our country still lag behind. Our reforms over the past 5 years have had an enormous impact. We gave successful schools the freedom to chart their own future, and they seized their opportunity to shine. They have shown us what is possible, and their success inspires others. But these bright spots also provide an ever stronger contrast with the continuing failure of others. And that's why some of our opponents have a problem with encouraging success and unlocking potential, because the contrast is uncomfortable, and because the stellar successes undermine traditional excuses. And avoiding that comparison is what led to the attitude which took hold among policymakers for the decade prior to 2010. Rather than striving for excellence, which risked exposing those schools which weren't up to the mark, they sought instead to level everyone down to the bottom. Rather than creating gold standard qualifications, they downgraded them to the lowest common denominator while inflating top grades. They prided themselves on the ever-rising results, but it wasn't real. Rather than encouraging innovation and creativity, they sought to direct and mandate what happened in classrooms, from the literacy hour to the approved 3-part lesson and the ever-expanding Ofsted handbook, against which schools' compliance was judged. As Michael Barber says, that approach can get you from awful to adequate, and maybe even to good, but it's not going to enable excellence. They said they respected teachers, but with that approach, it wasn't real. Rather than giving children from poor families access to great education, they instead created a new cadre of pseudo-qualifications, which claimed to be equivalent to academic qualifications. Teenagers got more certificates, and school results seemed to improve. But the qualifications weren't credible in the job market. They weren't real. They were, to be frank, a fraud on the young people taking them. Now, let me be clear. I don't think there was anything deliberately ill-intentioned about this attitude. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that it was motivated by kindness. But it was kindness driven by a tacit snobbery, by a fatalistic lack of confidence in human potential, by a worldview that certain kids, and let's be honest, kids like these always meant kids from poorer homes, could never succeed academically, and so we shouldn't even try. Nothing exposes that snobbery more than the fact that these politicians and policymakers were never thinking about their own children. They weren't going to allow their 14-year-olds to settle for qualifications in study skills or nail technology. They weren't going to let them narrow their scope at the age of 14 by filling their school timetables with NVQs and worthless certificates. To the contrary, they made sure their children would study key academic subjects, which they told everyone else weren't essential. Now, looking around the room here, I am sure most of us benefited from our parents and our teachers making sure that we took a balanced set of academic qualifications. And we'll do the same for our children, because we love them and we know that a good set of GCSEs will set them up for college and adult life. But the attitude that we shouldn't expect this of or for all children dominated our education system. And however well-intentioned it may have been, it was fundamentally pernicious. The test that must be asked of every education policy maker is it good enough for your child? And if you're not happy for your child to choose that track, then you shouldn't be offering it for other people's children. Now, I wonder how different things would have been over the past 20 years had that been the case. Maybe it wouldn't be the case that just under half of young people in Leicester get 5 A** to C GCSE grades, including English and maths. Maybe it wouldn't be the case that not a single child in Knowsley got A, B, or higher in their A-levels this year. Maybe it wouldn't be the case that in Doncaster, fewer than 6 in 10 children leave primary school able to read, write, and add up properly, compared with 7 in 10 nationally. But that's the reality that we face. That is a harsh reality. It's not that the children in those areas are born any less talented. It's not that parents in those areas don't want the best for their children. And it's not that the teachers in those areas are lazy or incompetent. Far from it. No, it is the fault of governments over the years. They lacked the courage to do what was necessary to turn our education system around. That is what we have set out to change, and it is working. Because there is nothing inevitable about the situation we find ourselves in. We can change it, and any politician who believes in social justice should want to do so. Even if you don't share the moral imperative, you at least see the practical one. In an increasingly globalised world, we need to make sure that young people in England can go toe-to-toe with their peers from across the globe and come out on top. And what irritates me the most is the suggestion that we do this for the wrong reasons, that we've taken the approach we've taken because we have some old-fashioned, outdated, atavistic view of the world and of young people. Let me be absolutely clear. I don't care if young people choose to watch Gogglebox and The X Factor, or if they're entranced and absorbed by YouTube and BuzzFeed, but I do care if they've never been given the chance to read Shakespeare, or to study Darwin, or to perform on a stage, or to fiddle with a Raspberry Pi. It's that choice that we are trying to achieve, to give young people the chance to decide what they enjoy, what they want to do, and ultimately who they want to be. To give them real opportunity and to support them along the way. Then they can make real and informed choices. But there can be no choice if we make lazy assumptions that narrow or eliminate their options. Now, it must be right that every child studies a strong academic core up until the age of 16, to unlock those choices, to offer those opportunities, to broaden their minds. And that's why I think every child should study maths, English, history or geography, a language and the sciences up until the age of 16. Not because I think these subjects are the only ones that matter. I can see the masses poised behind their keyboards, waiting to be outraged by the mere suggestion that I think that is the case. No, it's because these subjects are the academic core, the foundations of a good education that ultimately will keep options open for a young person's future. And that's why we introduced the English Baccalaureate, or the EBAC, in 2010. We wanted to be open about which options would equip pupils for the future. And we wanted to highlight which schools were making sure that pupils studied this academic core. And it has worked. The seemingly terminal decline in young people studying this valuable combination of subjects has reversed, almost doubling in just 5 years. That is something we should all find hugely welcome. And yet it remains the case that overall, just 39% of young people are now studying the EBAC, and in some areas, it's as low as 20%. Now, I'm told it's because the EBAC isn't right for those children. What does that mean? Who doesn't benefit from studying our nation's history? Who can't benefit and be inspired from understanding the fundamentals of science? So once again, we find adults writing off children, deciding what they can and they can't do. And worse, what they can, they can't go on to do before they've even turned 15. Now, that's why in our manifesto, we committed to introducing an expectation that every child who is able should study the EBAC. Today, we are consulting on how to deliver this and on better accountability for schools about the proportion of their students who take this set of core subjects. In time, I want to see at least 90% of students entering the EBAC. Now, of course, we know that too much goes wrong before young people have even set foot in secondary school. If children haven't mastered the basics in primary, the rest of their time in school is a game of catch-up. Maths and English, I believe, are the non-negotiables for a successful life. And children who don't master them at primary school are much, much less likely to succeed when they move on to secondary school. Only 7% of them, in fact, will go on to get 5 good GCSEs. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of my job as a Member of Parliament is seeing people come into my constituency office because they need help from my caseworkers in reading a letter that they have been sent. because they've never learned how to read and they are too embarrassed to tell those around them that they need their help. So of course we should be proud of the work that teachers and schools have done in the past 5 years to tackle the scandal of young people leaving school unable to read, write and add up properly. But that hasn't happened everywhere. Once again, we've seen areas of the country lagging behind and some young people starting secondary school without these fundamentals. So we're also delivering on our commitment to introduce new Year 7 resit tests to make sure that children who've fallen behind in primary school are supported to catch up at the start of secondary. We don't want these young people to be written off, and we want to recognise and reward the schools who get young people back on track. But catch-up in Year 7 is still catch-up. So I want to make sure that primary schools and their head teachers are being held to account in the right way, in a way that is fair and rewards those who take on a challenge. New, more rigorous SATs are already being introduced at the end of primary school, and the new reception baseline assessment has been introduced in primary schools this year. But to be really confident that students are progressing well through primary school, we will be looking at the assessment of pupils at the age of 7 to make sure it is robust and rigorous as it needs to be. We'll be working with head teachers in the coming months on how we get this right, holding schools to account and giving them full credit for the progress that they achieve. And to those who can't wait to question my commitment to higher standards, let me say this. I make no apology for wanting our policies to work together in a coherent way that works for pupils and teachers. My focus, and I think it's shared by everyone here and everyone in schools up and down the country, is on ensuring that we can be confident that every child is making the progress that we know that they can make. Because it's become abundantly clear to me since taking on this job that there are areas where young people aren't being given that great start in primary school, or they aren't being helped to catch up or stretch to succeed in secondary school. I am unapologetic and uncompromising in intervening swiftly to tackle educational failure wherever it lurks. That's what the Education Adoption Bill, currently going through Parliament, will allow us to do. It will allow us to turn around failing schools much more quickly. Because whilst adults argue about consultations and fight ideological battles, young people are losing on average 13 months of their education in a school that has already been deemed inadequate before things start to get better, and that cannot be right. And it will shine a spotlight on coasting schools as well. Schools that aren't stretching their pupils or pushing them to achieve their all, even though they scrape above the floor. Because a young person's time in school shouldn't be about achieving the bare minimum. We shouldn't settle for good enough. Schools should lead and inspire pupils to achieve all that they can, and even things that they never thought that they could. We will offer coasting schools the support and challenge they need to improve. Where they rise to that challenge, we will get out of the way and cheer them on. Where they don't, we will bring in new leadership and new sponsors to turn that school around. Because the evidence shows that excellent sponsors are making a real difference in some of our most challenging schools. We now need those strong sponsors to be everywhere, not just limited to the South East and London. It's a sad truth that when you look at many of the underperforming local authorities in our country, a significant proportion are located in the north of England. To try and tackle this, the Chancellor announced last year the creation of a Northern Sponsor Fund of £10 million to get the best sponsors to take on schools in the north of England. Today I am announcing the first recipients of that fund. 5 outstanding sponsors, Reach 4, Outward Grange, Wakefield City Academies Trust, Tahidal and Bright Tribe, who will set up 7 high-performing academy hubs in areas having some of the greatest need. But having the right policies and the right structures, the right curricula and even the right expectations mean nothing if you don't have the most important ingredient: great teachers. Everything I say and do is nothing compared to the real work of teachers on the ground who every day are inspiring young people and changing lives. It's teachers who have made our reforms a reality. And if we're going to have that educational excellence everywhere, then teachers will be the ones delivering it. And so we need more of them. That's why we've expanded schemes like Teach First and let schools take themselves take the lead in training the next generation of teachers. Now, I'm acutely aware that recruitment isn't easy at the moment for lots of schools. But as the economy improves and the demand for graduates grows across the whole economy, I and my team need to be doing more to get more people into or back into the profession and to keep the great teachers that we have. And we also need to get teachers in the right places. We can't simply have most of our best teachers concentrated in some areas. That isn't a one-nation education, far from it. We need great teachers right across the country. So today I'm delighted to announce that we will be delivering on yet another of our commitments with the creation of a national teaching service. A new national programme that will get our best teachers and middle leaders into underperforming schools in areas where they are most needed. We know that the areas I've named today, coastal towns and rural areas, struggle because they struggle to recruit and retain good teachers. They lack that vital ingredient that makes for a successful education. The National Teaching Service will play a key part in solving this problem. By 2020, it will have deployed 1,500 outstanding teachers and middle leaders to underperforming schools. These outstanding teachers will be employed by these schools for up to 3 years. They will not only be expected to bring outstanding teaching into the classroom, but also to improve the quality of teaching and leadership right throughout the school. That programme will launch next September in the northwest of England, targeting teachers and middle leaders to areas like Knowsley, which doesn't have a single outstanding secondary school. We will continue to look at what incentives we need to attract those outstanding teachers and how the programme can fast-track participants onto leadership opportunities. Because I want the National Teaching Service to be a valuable, inspiring experience for participants as well as the schools they join, and eventually to become a rite of passage for many more great teachers. Taken together, I believe that all of these measures are a clear sign of this government's determination to ensure that educational excellence is available to every single child everywhere in this country. To make sure that social justice isn't just a buzzword used by politicians, but is something that lies at the heart of every single school. To make sure that children in Knowsley, Poole, Derby, Blackpool, Portsmouth and other areas aren't being left behind. To raise the bar and heighten expectations, and to give schools the support they need to meet them. To complete the mission that we started in the last Parliament, finally to slay the soft bigotry of low expectations, and to build an education system that truly unites us as one nation. Thank you for your attention.
How long do you want to? Fantastic. Thank you so much, Secretary of State. We've got time for questions now. We'll take questions in groups of 2 or 3. Can I ask them to be very brief, please? There's a lot of people here who want to ask a question. You may get a microphone to you, but given how many people are in the room, you may just have to shout, and I'll repeat it. So if we take a question from there and a question from there, please.
Hello there, hi. I very much welcome your announcement about the National Teaching Service. As you know, we published the Why Teach report with our Ken Pearson last week and talked about what we call super social teachers, who are exactly those kind of teachers, keen to do that. At the same time, though, we also recognise that the labour market for teachers isn't very mobile, and most people stay in the area they've grown up in to teach. How will you be making sure that we actually also grow homegrown teachers in those areas that need outstanding teachers?
Good idea. ITV News. Just on the testing of 7-year-olds, you didn't mention the word standardisation specifically there. Do you believe in standardised tests, and what do you say to unions like the AUT who have said it's counterproductive, that standardisation, it doesn't work? And secondly, finally, very quickly, on Syria, it looks like the government won't now bring a vote on that. How embarrassing is that for the government?
Okay, well, let me start with the homegrown teachers. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there is, as I said in the speech, we know that there are teachers who are absolutely up for a challenge of taking on schools that have been struggling and working with other teachers. One of the exciting things we see in our education system now is that collaboration between schools and between teachers. And so I think we will work to make sure we've got the right incentives in place and to encourage people to travel perhaps to parts of the country to work there that they wouldn't otherwise have done so before. I think we need to look at professional development, about career progression, and of course there may be some financial incentives too. But you see, one of the things I think is when you get a great teacher into a school, then actually we'll be able to work with, obviously, with other teachers. And the point is the NTS, there won't just be one teacher going into a school, there'll be a small group of them, so they can support each other, then help the teachers in that school, obviously, to grow in confidence, to deliver that outstanding teaching we know that they absolutely are capable of. And I think sometimes in terms of the teacher recruitment, we forget that the best recruiting sergeants for teachers are the teachers standing in front of the classrooms. And I know I've been to schools before where they've talked about the careers fairs that they've done, and the one career that sometimes isn't represented at those careers fairs is teaching. And so I think the lesson is that we can't leave it to chance. We've got to go out there and tell people what a great profession it is, why we need more people, and as you say, to grow the next generation of teachers. In relation to 7-year-old tests, I mean, one of the things we're going to be doing is looking at, I talked about in my speech, working with heads and teachers on exactly how we best test 7-year-olds to make sure, this is all about making sure that we are confident in the progress that our youngest pupils are making at the start of their schooling. We've obviously got the reception baseline, but then obviously it's important we know at 7 and then at 11 how they are doing. For the very reason that I'd rather not play catch up when we get to secondary, get it right at primary. It's also important that we think about parents in all of this. You know, speaking as a parent of a 7-year-old who did his Key Stage 1 test earlier on this year, parents like to know how their children are doing in a way that is understandable and accountable. So I'm not going to set out at the moment exactly the details. We are going to look at and work with the profession. I'm also conscious of teacher workload, and obviously we've got a huge commitment to tackle that. And we want to make sure that we're testing the right way that doesn't add to teacher workload. On Syria, well, I mean, I think the Prime Minister ought to be very clear that we want to build a consensus in the House of Commons for any vote, but there is no change of policy.
Okay, let's have a couple of questions in the back. Yes, where's Bram? Bram, we're on the front side, you see there, and then a question from the gentleman at the back there. Yes, you sir.
Tougher tests at 7 years old, almost every teenager learning a foreign language. Are you simply piling on the pressure on children and on schools?
Can we come back? Do you want to take one? Yeah.
Mark Wakefield, IBM. Welcome the continuing focus on improving excellence in education. But I'd like to understand from an employer perspective how you balance the renewed focus on an academic curriculum against the demand and expressed desire from employers for a more vocationally oriented curriculum.
Okay, let me answer Brandon's question first about pressure on pupils. Going back to the answer I gave earlier, I think it's really important that we are able to measure in a way that we're all confident the progress that our pupils are making, both at primary and at secondary school. But the important point is that tests at 7, they are tests. They're not exams, they are tests, and there are ways for schools and parents to manage that so we support young people. When my son did his Key Stage 1 test earlier this year, he didn't know he'd taken them until afterwards. And so I think that's important. And same when we get to the end of primary school. I don't want to see after test parties being held. I want it to be something that children take as part of their schooling. It's important for accountability and for understanding progress. We don't build these things up and add the pressure. And in terms of modern foreign language, I mean, I think it actually ties in with the question we've heard about employability. One of the things that we have seen with employers is students be confident in their language abilities. It's important for communicating around the world. And yet we saw under the last government, the teaching of modern foreign languages plummeted. And actually that's had a knock-on effect then in terms of teacher recruitment. And so this is all about making sure that our young people have got those core subjects, that they're then able to go out into the world and they're competing with the best, not just in this country, but with the best in the world. And in terms of employers, I mean, we have made a very clear commitment as a government to 3 million more apprenticeships. We've also, in the last Parliament, looked at the vocational qualifications that young people are taking. So we got rid of 3,000 that didn't hold water with employers. And so the ones that young people now have on offer, people can be absolutely confident when they are recruiting them. But we have done a couple of other things as well. I do think that English and maths are the non-negotiables of our education system. As employers, you need to know that the people you're recruiting are literate and numerate, and that's why we think it's so important that all young people get those skills. And then I talked about keeping options open. But the other thing I've made a priority is this whole issue around the building of character. And we're not mandating what that means, because we think the best schools already do that, giving their young people those opportunities to work as part of teams, to build confidence, self-esteem, resilience, persistence, grit, all those things that employers say they want. And finally, of course, we've backed the launch of the Careers and Enterprise Company last year, which is building links via enterprise advisors, via the LEPs, between schools and businesses, again, to make sure that young people, we don't start too late, are aware of opportunities that are out there. Because every year there are new jobs and opportunities created with new technology, and we've got to make sure our young people are absolutely ready for that 21st century opportunity.
Okay, great. Let's take a question from the gentleman over there, and then the woman right there, so yeah, at the back. You might just have to shout, I think. Quick step, put your hand up again. Yeah, sorry, yes. Yeah, sorry, the woman back, yeah. Yeah, please, sorry, yeah.
So you touched briefly on teacher workload. Can you expand on what you are actually going to do to tackle that? Because that has an ongoing impact on children's education and teacher recruitment crisis. So it seems like something that would be foolish to overlook at this point.
Okay, and then the second question from yes, yeah.
Talking about schools and education up to 16, what about 16 to 18-year-olds? And why did you decide to protect certification education? And why does the employers have to pay VAT when schools and companies?
Okay, yeah, I think I've got all of that. So, in terms of workload, well, obviously we launched the workload challenge about this time last year, actually, and we reported back on it in February. We made some immediate changes, commitments from the department, commitments from Ofsted, not to make changes without adequate and good notice to schools. But there were three particular areas that came up, which were data collection, lesson planning, resources, and also marking. And we've got three working groups who are looking at that at the moment, who are led by classroom teachers and head teachers as well. And there are three, I can't tell you how fantastically feisty the three female chairmen are of these working groups. And they're going to tell me exactly what they think we can do to tackle those particular issues. I'm obviously particularly keen to hear about marking, because I know when I go around schools and talk to lots of teachers, that's a particular issue of concern. But we are very conscious in any changes that we make, exactly as I said about the test, of the impression and the pressure that places on workload. So we've got more changes coming. But I've also been clear, there isn't a magic wand, and this has also got to be profession-led as well. CFE can obviously do so much in this space, but so too can the profession, and often utilising new technology as well. And we see that in some schools, where actually we do know. I go and ask the question when I go and visit schools, and some places clearly, from the head downwards, the desire to make sure that teacher workload is in the right balance, heads have absolutely prioritised that, and I really welcome that. In terms of 16, today's speech is very much, it is about schools, pre-16. We've also got the spending review coming up. I think in the last part, it would be right to say, obviously, we particularly prioritise funding for pre-16 and often early years, because getting it right at the start is so hugely important. We will have more to say about 16 to 18. I'm speaking at the Association of Colleges conference coming up shortly, and obviously we've got the area-based reviews, ties in with the gentleman's point here about employers as well, making sure that post-16 courses as such, particularly vocational ones, that employers want to see. And in relation to VAT, I get a lot of submissions about this. We are clearly still in a very tight spending environment, so we have had to make some key priorities. But Nick Bowles and I hear a lot on that and absolutely understand where people are coming from.
Okay, great. So let's take a question from Greg, and then a question from the woman in the check there.
Yeah. Hi, Greg.
Greg Hurst from The Times. Do you see your role as continuing the school reforms of Michael Gove, your predecessor, or are you trying to take policy in a different direction that's definably your own? And if so, what is the difference in your approach? And just on the compulsory EBAC, what is the implication for the specialist schools we've seen, such as university technical colleges and studio schools, that try and define themselves by recruiting at 14 with a different curriculum?
Okay.
Hi, Susanna from educational charity Action Tutoring. We work with a number of schools and teachers around the country, some of them doing an incredible job, as has already been raised. Workload is a huge issue. I'm interested in what role you think businesses, community groups, charities and so on could play in supporting this vision, and what it might be possible to do to help that to be achieved.
Okay. Firstly, in terms of, I think this is it's a continuation of the last government's reforms, but clearly moving into a new phase, because we're at the start of a parliament, we're able to plan 5 years ahead. But also I think because of the tough decisions that were taken in the last parliament, tough but very necessary, I am now able to identify some of the areas where actually I think even Michael would say that he wouldn't have time or the ability. You have to obviously identify the areas where you're going to make the change, which I think he did in terms of curriculum, in terms of obviously structures of schooling, but things like now the National Teaching Service, the identification obviously of workload, but also things like the additional, and actually comes on really to answer the second question about the additional things I want to see schools doing in terms of building strong, confident, resilient young people, which I think we are building on and expanding, and this is very much my my step forward and saying these are the things I think are really important now. In terms of UTCs, that's one of the consultation questions will be about, in the EBAC consultation document, will be about the schools. I mean, on the one hand, what I don't want is for, just because it's a certain type of school, we're not going to offer a core curriculum. But I do appreciate there are particular schools with perhaps a focus on engineering, for example, where that might be right that they're going to focus on that. So, part of this is about listening to those who are working absolutely in the schools and the colleges, and hearing what they say about the EBAC in terms of particularly for their types of schools and colleges. And in relation to outside help and third parties, look, I mean, I think one of the reasons for launching the Careers and Enterprise Company and backing it was because lots of businesses said they'd like to help out in schools, but they weren't always sure who to contact, and likewise, schools are saying they wanted businesses to come in. That's one of the ways of brokering those links. And I think it's exactly the same with community groups and charities and others. The character awards that we had earlier on this year showed, for example, the strength of working in partnership with outside bodies to perhaps give young people different experiences. And one of the character funds that we've awarded is to the Scout Association, who are working, for example, in some very challenging schools and challenging areas to give young people that experience of life and different opportunities that they wouldn't otherwise perhaps have had. So I think there's huge scope for partnership working, and I'm always very conscious of the fact that teachers don't have to do everything. What I want to do is concentrate on what they do best and what they love doing, which is teaching, and there are others who also come in to support.
Okay, great. Question from the gentleman in the corner there, and then question from the gentleman from there.
I wonder, you talked about workload issues. I wonder what safeguards have been built that the workload that teachers are currently getting isn't going to be passed on just to support staff and other workers, because the workload's still going to be there, and what safeguards there. And also, in the light of the government professionalising the College of Teachers and things for teachers, I wonder what work that the government are going to help out in supporting other classroom-based staff, such as teaching assistants and learning mentors.
Hello, Julian Stanley, Education Support Partnership. We're a charity working with teachers, often around facing issues of crisis around stress. What we've seen in continued surveys is the amount of stress in the profession. In fact, it's still the highest level of stress-related illness than any other profession. And the number of sick days that accrue from that, costs in terms of supply teaching, hugely increase. That's one part of my question. What's your view on the need of school leaders, governors and government in tackling that, particularly because we're also asking teachers now to look at the mental health of children. And if they can't look after their own, or their employers can't necessarily do that as well, that's going to be problematic. My second question really relates to a comment at the weekend from speaking to a number of NQTs who were talking about the changes from PGCE to Schools Direct and Teach First and so on as routes in, but finding it very, very difficult to get placements and places. And in the context of a recruitment and retention crisis, what do you think can be done about that?
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much. Firstly, let me say, I think the College of Teaching is hugely encouraging. We're watching, we've said we will absolutely support it, but this has to be profession-led. And in terms of workload, what I don't want to see is workload just being passed on. I mean, we've got to tackle some of these issues. So in terms of looking at data collection, actually what data is collected are the things we can do to simplify that. I agree with you, I don't think the answer to this is just to pass it on down the line. But I do think that schools sometimes, perhaps ties in with a question here as well, can think about, are the right people doing the right things that we ask of them? Are we asking the right things of the people that are in our schools? And I think teaching assistants are hugely valuable and important. It's up to schools, obviously, how they deploy them in the most effective way to support those in the classrooms. And in relation to stress and mental health, I mean, I think you're right. I think schools, we often talk about schools only in terms of being educators, but they are employers too. And thinking about the work-life balance, the stresses and strains, it should be the same for schools as they are management teams, as they are for any other employer. It always amazes me when I get an email, occasionally I do, from a teacher, a bit of a cry for help sometimes if they've been working very long hours. And my first question is usually, have you raised this with the person that you're reporting to, your head of department, your head? And often the answer is no. And I do think that actually governors as well have a role to play in asking about the health and the well-being of staff in a school. In relation to recruitment channels, well, we've taken the caps off this year for school directors for schools, so that actually we're not setting necessarily the numbers that they can recruit to, and we will be flexible because, as I said, I recognise recruitment is a challenge, particularly in certain subjects. I think the school director is hugely exciting, and I think offers a real opportunity for people to work in the school environment early on, but also often for people coming into teaching later, for whom actually going back and having a year studying without learning isn't an option. But actually working in a school, taking immediate advantage of their experience is very much something that they can do.
And
so that's
our
our flexibility.
Will the National Teaching Service relate to those that are training but are struggling to find a match? Sometimes moving, house prices, all of that stuff means recruitment and matching need with where you've got trainees and placements is a problem.
I think it's something, I mean, look, the National Teaching Service, particularly those who are slightly more experienced, the idea is they will be experienced teachers and, as I said, middle leaders who are able to go and provide that support to the school. But you're absolutely right to say that obviously one of the things in terms of thinking about how we encourage people to move to challenging areas is going to what other support we can put in place for the rest of their lives.
Fantastic. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. I'm sorry, I know there's an awful lot of people who want to ask questions. Again, mark of your popularity this day. But on behalf of everyone here, can I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks, John.